Violence and Femicide Response Fund has come under fire for suggesting the introduction of wearables and apps to fight gender-based violence. Founder of SA Women Fight Back, that's Bronwyn Litkie, described the idea as a ridiculous way of doing things. For action to this, we're joined by the CEO of Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund, Ms. Lindi Dlamini. Ms. Dlamini, good morning and thank you very much for your time.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. Honestly, yesterday when we had that interview with SA Women Fight Back, it really criticized you, particularly around your announcement of fighting GBV through wearables as well as these apps. And what they're saying is that this has been done before and some of the shortcomings have been well documented. So why would you seek to reinvent the wheel? Talk to me about this.
I think it's an ill-informed comment. What we said is that we're investigating the use of technology that is coming up. We're in the middle of a fourth industrial revolution. There surely has to be something that is scalable, that can be used nationally, that can reach a rural footprint. We certainly don't advocate for any solutions that solve for the middle class or urban classes. We want solutions to reach the people who can't reach where help is. And that's the rural community. So I think it was an ill-informed comment. She certainly hasn't engaged with us about it and certainly doesn't have an idea what it is we're looking at. We have looked at the applications that have been launched, such as Bright Sky, such as a host of other ones. And the limitation is the fact that they serve only people with smartphone technology.
Yes.
And people with access to data. Those are two things that we know are a problem. And so technology is not limited to apps. There's RFI technology that works with radio frequency waves. Is it possible for community to organize themselves in terms of responsiveness? And radio frequency waves don't require data or network to work. So it's an investigation and looking into a host of these things. In the UK, Smart Water has been launched, which is like the dye that's used in money packs. And if somebody attacks you, you can actually use that dye on them. And it helps to identify the person, particularly if you're attacked at night or in a foreign place and so forth. It's an identifier that would help police to track them down. So I think it was a narrowly constructed view.
So you're not necessarily confined to apps, like you say. You're investigating
it's an
broadly.
Investigation, yes. It's a technological investigation.
Currently, how far are you in the investigations and where is it leading you to?
So it's early days. I think the most important thing is the fulfillment of the mandate that the fund exists for. And that is to resource and fund community-based organizations on the ground. And this is something that we accelerated, having been launched on the 4th of February last year. By July, we'd put out a call for proposals. Up until August, by December, we'd made decisions. And by the end of our financial year, in February, we had paid 90% of those grant recipients. So we've paid 110 grant recipients countrywide, 4 large intermediary organizations to a tune of 69 million that's going to be payable over 2 years. And that's our primary focus. So the investigations are, who can we partner with who is doing something meaningful that can start to assist people, particularly in poor and rural communities, because they're far from police stations and so forth. So that's a secondary consideration.
All right. So it goes beyond your mandate, which is in fact to fund organizations now with their initiatives, particularly those that are based or dealing with GBV. But there was another concern in that interview around the fund recipients. You had SA Fight Back saying they have struggled, even Tears Foundation say they have struggled to locate the beneficiaries and say who they are because of the little community that they have established among themselves as NGOs, none of them had received the grant. They said they didn't qualify, neither did Tears Foundation. And I was quick to say perhaps you didn't meet the criteria. Maybe you are a more well-established foundation. Maybe you were looking for the more obscure ones in the rural areas. What is the criteria and where are those beneficiaries?
The criteria were well articulated in the call for proposals. We were looking for community-based organizations in local communities. We were not looking for national organizations. We've engaged specifically with Tears around why they didn't qualify. I don't know if Bronwyn's organization had applied, but as to the organizations that have been funded, it is publicly stated. Our website lists all of them, lists them by province, So there's been transparency, and to the extent that she indicates that despite requesting, and I'm not sure who she's been engaging with because there's no record of engagement with her, at Chikululu, who are implementing partners or directly within the fund, and there are only 6 people employed by the fund. So there's no record of that, but it's publicly available on our website in any event. Yeah.
So you're saying, insofar as the criteria is concerned, if you can just refresh our memory, you're saying that it must be a rural organization,
Yes.
definitely not national.
Definitely not national. We were focused not on rural, on community-based organizations that are intervening or driving programs and interventions locally. And we wanted to make sure that we get as many of those as possible. What is the reason for that? Soon after being launched, we engaged with civil society. As you know, civil society is the reason why we exist. It's civil society mobilizing and raising the call around the importance of resourcing causes that support the fight against gender-based violence. And the priorities were geographic equity. There are provinces that were underfunded, Eastern Cape, KZ, and Limpopo. We needed to deploy resources to rural communities. 40% of that 69 million went to rural communities, 20% to informal settlements. And we needed to ensure that these are organizations that have at least a 1-year track record. We were also made aware that there are organizations that are less formally structured, may not qualify. How do we make room to ensure that they do get assistance?
Yes.
And that is why we brought on board the 4 large intermediary organizations, Soul City, Gender Justice, and so forth, Mikulu Trust, and SCAT. That was to ensure that we ask them to incubate those organizations on grant to them. These are fledgling organizations, and the outcomes are really that they must build capacity, resource, mentor, and coach them, ensure that they can implement their programs so that they can qualify for funding in their own right. So there's definitely no sketchy criteria. You had to be in place for at least a year. You had to have evidence of running programs. Your programs had to be linked to pillars 2 and 3 of the National Strategic Plan. And lastly, you had to be up to date with your taxes and so forth. And those that were not, we actually assisted them
like that aspect.
to get across the line.
I like that aspect because you do find these NGOs that are not formalized, but they're doing a lot of good work in that community.
Absolutely.
So the incubation program is very important for some of those to be able in future to get that grant. Thank you very much for joining us, Ms. Dlamini.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that was CEO of Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund, Lindi Dlamini.